You know, when you first discover a song you love, you play it on repeats, you can't get enough of it. Then Spotify puts it in every playlist. The radio plays it every hour, and everyone puts it across Instagram. But then a few weeks later, you start to skip it. What has changed? The song is the same, but you've basically just heard too much of it. Now, think about that concept and apply it to people, to brands, or even to you. In an episode in series 1, we spoke about saying less and winning more, and that power of strategic scarcity, and use examples of Daniel Day-Lewis and Rolex, as they are very good at holding back. But today I'm looking at the flip side, not the benefits of saying less, but the hidden costs of actually saying too much, what actually happens when you're everywhere, and how it damages you without realizing. Because overexposure doesn't feel like failure, it actually feels like success. You're getting booked, content's everywhere, the engagement is looking good. But then quietly, without warning, people stop caring. I'm Mark Di-Toro, and for 20 years, I've worked with successful brands and impressive individuals, helping them grow. So let's talk about it. So here's what makes overexposure so dangerous. It's actually invisible when it happens. You don't wake up one day and think, right, I've definitely overdone it. There's no real red light, no metric necessarily, but it does creep up, and the engagement starts to drop slowly. Comments get less enthusiastic, but nothing dramatic really happens unless there's a crisis. But you keep going because the incentives that you have keep pointing you that way, and that's that content engine. Every platform tells you post more, be consistent, stay relevant. And then the algorithm, of course, rewards that frequency. So you do more. So you appear on more podcasts, do more LinkedIn posts, speaking slots, media work, thought leadership. But somewhere along the way, you've crossed that line, and it's hard to really determine when that happens. I've spoken about scarcity building value, and that's true. But actually, today we're going to be talking through the topic of what overexposure will cost you, not philosophically, but practically, because I think a few things happen when you get that level of overexposure. You actually deplete the goodwill faster than you realize. People start seeing the performance and not the person, and then finally, when something goes wrong, there's not much left to protect you. So breaking it down, the inverted U-curve, when more actually becomes less. Back in the 1960s, psychologist Robert Zayonk ran experiments on what's called the mere exposure effect. He found that the more people saw something, random shapes, made up words, whatever, the more they liked it. And this became the foundation of modern advertising: repetition, building familiarity then building trust. But here's what's interesting. Later research in the 70s and 80s found something Zayonk missed. The curve doesn't go up forever. It's what psychologists call the inverted U-curve. So at first, mere exposure increases the liking, but then it peaks. And if you keep going, the liking actually declines. So eventually you hit the saturation point, which then triggers irritation. Studies from researchers like Bornstein and Sawyer showed this happens across the board with music, with faces, with brands, and with messages. But there is a sweet spot, and once you pass it, the additional exposure can actually make people like you less. But as we've said, it's hard to really, it's hard to tell when you've hit that peak. because there's no real signal. As we mentioned, the songs on the radio. The first few times you hear them, they're great. Then it's on every playlist, in every shop, on every ad, on every TikTok. And suddenly you're sick of it. Not because the song changed, but because you've actually heard too much of it. And that can happen with people. There's loads of examples. Ed Sheeran's 2017 Divide album is a great example of, every single was in the charts simultaneously, and no one really could escape him for months. Some people may have loved it, but generally there was probably a bit of Ed Sheeran fatigue. And not because the music was bad at all, it was brilliant, but because it was everywhere. And he ended up taking some time off for various reasons, to step back completely, and then now is coming back in more strategic moments. So more visibility, clearly doesn't equal more value, depending on how you look at it. And most people will suggest just to keep going, but actually, in my opinion, that's wrong. So second part is goodwill depletion, which I feel is like this invisible cost. Goodwill is finite. And there's social science research that shows repetition works like a bank account. The more you make deposits through good work, valuable contributions, generous acts, and then you make withdrawals every time you ask for attention, even when it's positive. But the problem is most people don't realize that every appearance is like a withdrawal, even the good ones, because attention is finite and spread so thin. We only have so much capacity, right? And every time you show up, you're spending some of that capacity. So if you're showing up constantly, even when you're brilliant, you're not really adding new value. You're just draining the account. Psychologists call this resource depletion. And it applies to reputations just as much as it applies to willpower or attention. A study from Stanford looked at how people respond to repeated messaging from the same source. And what they found was the first few messages are effective, but past a certain threshold, people start tuning out. Not consciously, they just stop processing it with the same attention. Hopefully not with this podcast. That's goodwill depletion in action. Now, if you've got a full account, loads of deposits, loads of credibility, you can afford those withdrawals, and that's fine. But if you're making constant withdrawals without depositing new value, the account drains. So I think another example is Will Smith. 30 years of goodwill, lovable, charm, blockbuster, movie star, Oscar winner. Then, of course, the Oscar slap. And he had quite a bit of buffer, but it couldn't absorb everything. And he's now spent the last 3 or 4 years growing that once again. The final part is when the performance becomes visible. So this is what's called discrepancy detection, concept from cognitive psychology. When we see something repeatedly, our brains start analyzing it more carefully. We look for patterns and consistencies and effort. When we start seeing the effort, that magic dies. And this is what happens with overexposure. People stop seeing your persona, they start seeing the performance. And there's research from Princeton that shows when people encounter the same individual repeatedly in different contexts, they become better at detecting that inauthenticity. Brain gets calibrated, it starts noticing, wait, they tell the same story every time. They use the same phrases, the spontaneous moments weren't actually spontaneous. Think about someone you follow across socials or you like to listen to. If you see that person on different podcasts, for example, or TV shows, and you realize they start to say the same thing. They start to tell the same jokes. They start to tell the same anecdotes. Their timings are always exactly the same. You then see them as performers, which removes some of the authenticity. And so there's a line that you need to make sure that you don't cross. So and I think another thing is actually that the public don't turn on you all at once. They'll turn quietly and almost privately. Pluralistic ignorance, where everyone privately feels something, but no one says it publicly because they think perhaps they're the only one. And that's what happens with overexposure fatigue. People get tired, but they don't necessarily announce it. But it builds silently and slowly and invisibly. But then something can happen, an incident or a controversy, and then people use that as an excuse. The public then will then turn. An example perhaps is James Corden. I mean, he was very successful, still is very successful, was everywhere, across different platforms, and then but there were rumors around his behavior behind closed doors, let's say, and he was banned from a New York restaurant for being rude to staff. I mean, this is well documented. When that story went public, the reaction was pretty bad. Maybe that was that moment that people were looking for. So the pattern seems to be overexposure depletes goodwill silently. The public gets, let's say, fatigued, but don't really have an outlet. Then an incident provides that permission, and then that rejection can be piled on quite suddenly. So how do you know if you're crossing the line? I would say watch for these signals. Number one, engagement shifts from active to passive. People watch but don't necessarily interact. Secondly, you can't remember the last time you said no, so every opportunity feels urgent. People start noticing your frequency rather than your content. You know, oh no, he or she's on another podcast or another show. And then finally, I'd say you're working harder, but you're not getting the return. So diminishing returns. So there are a few things you can do here to counter this. Obviously, build in that more strategic absence, which is tough, but it's more of a work in progress to find that sweet spot. Of course, quality over quantity, always. One high impact appearance beats 10 mediocre ones for sure. Pick your moments and protect the mystique. You don't need to over explain everything. People value you more when they don't have the total access. So to sum up, I think overexposure, it's not about being lazy or hiding. It's about being smart with your presence. The people and brands with real lasting influence, they get this. They know when to show up and when to step back. And they protect that goodwill in the bank account, and make their appearances intentional. Sometimes that's saying no, turning things down, letting others actually take the moment, have the spotlight. But that's discipline that you should build, a muscle that you should definitely be working on, and separates people who burn bright for a few months and people who last for a long period of time. You don't have to be everywhere to matter. What I would say, what can you pull back on, whether that's in your personal life or in work? But then come in with quality when needed. Thanks for listening. If you found it useful, hit follow so you don't miss the next one. Talk soon.